The 5th anniversary of what are called the 7/7 London bombings. And perhaps time to reflect on how the UK has been dealing with what many called homegrown terrorism. Just what lessons have been learned from these deadly attacks, and to what extent has the fabric of a society been altered in their wake? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. It's 5 years since 52 people were killed and nearly 800 injured by a series of suicide bombing attacks in London. The bombers were 4 young Muslim men, all Britons, with apparently ordinary lives. In the wake of the attacks, the then Blair government introduced a number of new security measures, as well as what it called an outreach programme aimed at understanding and integrating the country's Muslim community. Whether these measures worked or not, as Paul Brennan reports, they definitely changed the fabric of British society.
The images are as vivid today as they were 5 years ago. Survivors emerging, bloody and dazed, from below ground. The emergency services struggling to cope with an unprecedented wave of coordinated suicide bombings. And the stories of the victims, whose lives were ended so abruptly and cruelly. 39-year-old Anat Rosenberg was on a crowded bus, talking to her partner on her mobile phone.
And as she talked, suddenly I heard screams, ghastly screams in the background. Nothing from Anat, no explosion, and after a few seconds, the line went dead.
There had been an explosion. Anat had been killed instantly. 5 years on, Mr. Falding still feels an acute sense of loss, but no hatred.
If I had to express any animosity, it would be towards those people who radicalized the bombers, who fed them such a distorted view of Islam.
As well as the 4 suicide bombers, 52 people were killed. 7/7, as it became known, changed Britain forever. An anti-Muslim backlash was contained and minimized through swift political intervention. And in the 5 years since, Muslim beliefs and concerns have moved from the political sidelines to the mainstream.
Not because of terrorists, this is because of the resolve of the people of this country to define each tragedy in a positive way, that it helps us to move, not only move on, but also to be vigilant and cautious, and also to remedy those issues that created it at the first place.
On July 7th last year, this simple memorial to the victims was inaugurated. 52 steel pillars, one for each of the victims, and a plaque bearing all their names. Thousands of people pass this spot every day. Few give it a second glance. It's just another one of London's many public monuments. But each of these 52 pillars represents a cherished family member ripped away from their loved ones by extremist hatred. And the steel that each is made of represents the strength required to overcome that hatred. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, London.
Joining us now from London are our guests. Firstly, Houriya Ahmed. She's a researcher at the Centre for Social Cohesion. Also joining us, Tobias Feakin. He's head of Homeland Security Capabilities at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. And finally, Azzam Tamimi. He's a director of the Institute of Islamic Thought. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Tobias Feakin. How successful do you think the government has been in countering terror acts over the past 5 years?
It depends exactly how you look at quantifying success. I mean, in terms of inhibiting would-be terrorists to actually carry out successful attacks, yeah, absolutely. You know, we've been very, very successful in the UK at countering that threat. We haven't had any successful attack since 2005, the events of 2005. So in that sense, yes, we've been very, very successful. I guess your question is also hinting at how successful have we been, if you like, in undermining violent extremist thought within the UK and countering the threat from within the UK. And that's far more difficult to actually quantify and say how successful or otherwise we've actually been.
Well, let me put that to Azzam Tamimi. How successful on that particular level do you think attempts have been to lower the level of possible threat among discontented communities?
Well, I'm delighted that the atrocities have not been repeated. No sane person living in Britain, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, would want to see these atrocities, because we are all potential victims when these things happen. However, I think the problem is that the government adopted measures which, in my opinion, will not resolve the issue forever and will not eradicate the potential for a resumption of such atrocious acts in the future.
Well, explain further why you believe that.
You see, you need three things in order to eradicate extremism and eliminate the possibility of violence. First, policing, and this is where all the effort has been concentrated. Second, community relations, getting the community to help in controlling, curtailing, and undermining any such trends. And what the government has done is mechanically intervene in the Muslim community, resulting in or causing a backlash. Muslims are very unhappy about what the government has been doing since then. And thirdly, there is also the necessity of review of policy. The reason these young men were radicalized and were recruited by Al-Qaeda is that they had grievances which are shared by many others in this country, Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And despite having been proven wrong in going to war in Iraq and earlier in Afghanistan, the government has done nothing about reviewing policy or even admitting that it has been wrong.
Well, Houriya Ahmed, your view about those statements, in particular the government, and I quote, mechanically interfering in the Muslim community in the wake of the attacks?
Well, firstly, I'd like to point out that though there have been a number of terrorist plots that the government and the security services have been successful in stopping and thwarting, they have been very lucky in other circumstances. Straight after 7/7, in that very same month, in the very same year, we had a group of young men who had also attempted to detonate bombs in the London Underground. However, luckily, their bombs did not detonate. It's the same case with the Glasgow airport bombings. Luckily, no one died in that suicide attack. Same case with some lone wolf individuals that we've had in the UK who attempted to detonate bombs, but it didn't work. So I think there has been, to a certain extent, the government being successful, but at the same time, they were just extremely lucky. I think in terms of interfering, as Azzam Tamimi has said, within the Muslim community, I think it's dangerous for the government to assume that the threat mainly comes from the Muslim community. Yes, Al-Qaeda does represent the biggest threat and poses the biggest threat to the UK's national security, but the government has unfortunately painted the same brush of extremism towards Muslim community in the UK. The Centre for Social Cohesion has actually just released a report showing